very warm good morning to all present here. I am Nihar, a student of 3rd year BBLLB Honours, and your host for this session on scientific fault lines in conservation laws. In the words of Henry Ford, mistakes are a source of experience, and it is the essence that we call wisdom, unquote. For this session today, we have with us Mr. Praveen Bhargav, who is trustee of Wildlife First, and he is also a former member of National Board for Wildlife. On behalf of the Center for Environmental Studies, Law and Policy and its coordinators, I welcome you, sir.
Thank you.
And all the dignitaries present here for the first lecture of this semester. The Center for Environmental Studies, Law and Policy has been proactive ever since its creation. We have been conducting regular lectures and events across the university to encourage student participation in various aspects of environmental law as per student interest. Now, I would like to call upon stage our respected Dean, Faculty of Law, Professor Dr. T.R. Subramania, to give the welcome address and to felicitate our guest.
Very good morning to all the teachers and dear students who are present here. We have today Shri Praveen Bhargav. He had visited this institution 3 years ago and had delivered a wonderful lecture in the area of environment. Being a man from the field and actually worked for the protection of environment and the conservation of natural resources, whatever it be, he is well known to the community. Sir, on behalf of the Board of Management, on behalf of the CMR School of Legal Studies, I deem it a great pleasure to welcome you. I also welcome all of them who are present here and listen to this carefully. And at the end of the day, after the lecture, if you may ask 1 or 2 questions for purpose of knowing many more things, or at least knowing a few sources on the topic. Be with it. Good luck to you.
Thank you, sir, for your kind words. Now, I would like to call Maria, student of 3rd year BBLB Honours, to introduce Mr. Praveen Bhargav to the audience.
Thank you, Nihal. Good morning, everyone. We have with us today Mr. Praveen Bhargav, Managing Trustee at Wildlife First, a non-profit conservatory organization. Being a former member of the National Board for Wildlife, he has represented Wildlife First on the board chaired by the Prime Minister. Mr. Bhargav has served on various expert committees of the Ministry of Environment and Forest and the National Tiger Conservation Authority. He was a part of the subcommittee on the amendments to the Wildlife Protection Act of 1972. Currently, he also serves as a member of the Enquiry Committee on the Sagar Elephant Corridor constituted by the Honorable Supreme Court of India. Having dedicated a significant amount of his time in volunteering to coordinate Wildlife First conservation campaigns to save the precious wildlife habitats in the Western Ghat biodiversity hotspot, since 1996, Mr. Bhargav has been part of a core group of Wildlife First volunteers who relentlessly campaigned against the iron ore mining in the heart of Kudremukh National Park. This decade-old battle finally led to a landmark Supreme Court judgment on a petition filed by Wildlife First. All mining activities have stopped since December 2005, and the mining lease area is now fully notified and forms a part of the Kudremukh National Park. He has conducted several training programs and workshops for media persons, judicial magistrates, police and the customs and forest officers. Mr. Bhargav had received a certificate of recognition from the Wildlife Conservation Society in 1998. The ESSO honor for tiger conservation was awarded in 2001 for his sustained tiger conservation efforts. In 2002, an eminent international panel nominated him for the Environmental Leaders Forum hosted by Center for Environmental Research and Conservation, Columbia University, New York. He was also selected to participate in the International Visitor Leadership Program on Public Parks and Conservation by the US government in 2005. The Sanctuary magazine presented the 2006 Wildlife Service Award for his efforts to protect and secure Karnataka's wildlife and forests. We are indeed honored to have you amongst us, sir. We welcome you. The dice is yours.
Good morning, everybody. And first of all, I should thank Professor Subramanya and the faculty for inviting me to be with all of you. It's always great to talk to young minds, curious minds. You're all raring to go get into the profession of law, and some of you will be in litigation, some of you will be in other fields of law. But wherever you are, one thing is important, that you should always try to think in terms of what you could contribute to society. You could be a lawmaker tomorrow, and if you, whatever you study here and whatever you carry forward, this will serve some of the lectures, some of the discussions you have had with your eminent faculty will always be very useful for you tomorrow when you go out and much later in life also. So what I will do today is, I will not speak for a long time, because if I keep speaking, you will just keep listening, some of you will fade away, and you may clap at the end. I don't want that to happen. And even last time when I was here, I was trying to tell all of you that you should participate. So can we make this interactive? Are you all interested to make this interactive?
Yes. Yes. Yes.
So you can ask questions, you can throw up ideas, we can debate it, because it shouldn't be a monologue. I can speak, no problem, but I don't want to speak. I want you all to participate. Okay, so with that, we have set the ground rules, and let's proceed. It's 10:30, so for about 45 minutes I'll speak, and then we can open it up, and you can always ask anything, not just about the subjects that we talk, any subject on conservation law, any questions, any doubts. What is the latest legal event that has happened of some substance? Is anybody aware? In the last couple of months, there was a very major event that has played out as far as law is concerned, conservation law. Anybody tracking the developments? There was okay, let me lead you further. There was an amendment to a very important law. Anybody following it? So it was an amendment to the Wildlife Protection Act. So these are things that you need to follow, because a lot is happening and you should participate in that process. And as a citizen of this country, I'm sure you have read constitution law and the rights that you have in terms of participating in the public process. So you should do that. And those are things which will up your knowledge and your understanding of law. Okay, so with that, so today I selected this subject because I didn't want to read sections of the law which you normally do in class. That will be boring. So I wanted to throw open a particular subject of science and law. There have been tremendous advancement in science as we speak, and I'm sure you're following it. There is tremendous increase of knowledge in biodiversity, biotechnology, digital technology, many things, medicine, so forth. Now, ultimately, if laws are not recognizing these advances in science, which is telling decision makers and citizens of this country as to what is the real issues and where are the solutions. So, without that and without science getting infused into law, the law itself may be missing out something, and that may not be good for the country to protect its natural resources. So therefore, today I selected this subject on the role of science in conservation, and where science is not really infiltrated, the scientific concepts, the scientific findings are not in law, in conservation law, to the desired extent. So that is what is the subject of my talk, and let's proceed forward. So, Robin Feldman in this book, and I think this book can be in the library if possible, if it's already not there. So there is an interrelationship between law and science, and the problems pertaining to law linked to science. And this is an interesting subject in conservation law particularly, because I look at it only from the aspect of conservation law, for the simple reason, as you will find out throughout this talk, that we are facing a very severe challenge, because India is a country with 1.3, 1.4 billion people, 1/3 the size of North America, and the second highest livestock population in the world. So there is pressure on landscapes, natural landscapes, forested landscapes. And how do we hang on to these landscapes? We are losing forests, we are losing biodiversity. You're all aware of it. In spite of good laws, the country has a set of very good laws, but in spite of that, we are losing it. So, use of good science to amend laws or policies in order to ensure that we deal with this pressure on the land in a manner, in a scientific manner, so as to find solutions. If you go to any website, you go to any talk, you open a newspaper, go on a television channel, what do you find? Everybody is narrating problems galore. Ad nauseum, they're narrating problems. Where are the solutions? So you need to find solutions, credible solutions, for which you need science. Even courts, for example, you go to courts, tomorrow you will be filing a PIL or you will be arguing in front of a court. If you are presenting your arguments which are grounded in science, as your dean will agree, your chances of convincing a court will be that much higher. Because the way constitutional court judges look at a public interest issue is very different. It's not a civil court. It will not go only by the letter of the law. They will bring in, and they have a much broader canvas to judge whether there's merit in your argument or not. And science lends credibility to your arguments. Yes, there is the letter of law, but still it's important. For instance, use of satellite imagery. It's a new scientific, relatively new. Today, courts are leaning on satellite imagery to determine why. Can anybody say why satellite imagery is useful?
You could tell us the extent of forest, or how the boundaries of forests are changing.
Changing, correct. So by change, what do you mean? It
how
is
much we are losing.
So you go back in time. So you're fighting a case where you're saying that in 2005 the forests were 500 square kilometers. It has shrunk to 200 square kilometers. You can conclusively prove in a court of law with satellite imagery that the forest indeed has gone in by 10 kilometers. So these are some of the things that you need to be in tune with in order to bring science into law. So you can read this book. I don't want to go further in detail. As I said, we have many laws, many good laws. And in your course, you would have studied some of these laws, and or you would be studying it. So it is not that we do not have laws, but there is one field where there is no law. I'll come to that a little later. So now let us look at some of these laws and what is the deficiency, science deficiency in some of these laws, and how it can, with the infusion of science, be more beneficial in terms of protecting these landscapes. You also have policies, and policies, as you know, you have the Constitution. From the Constitution flow the laws, then the rules, then guidelines, policies, etc. So policies also have to be in tune with the latest findings. For instance, the National Forest Policy, in my view, is archaic. It has not, unfortunately, and I wrote a paper also on this, it was published, and in my submissions to the government also I expressed this view. So we will look into these aspects as we go along today, and I'll pinpoint specific deficiencies that exist in the context of how to balance the development requirements of this country and the imperatives of ensuring that we protect biodiversity and nature. So it's a fine line, and that is where this knowledge and science comes in. So policies are around, and we will look at some of them. So let's plunge in to the main issue today. You all know what is biodiversity. Biodiversity is nature in its totality. It includes forests, it includes every organism which resides in a forest, plants, even small species like earthworms to maybe elephants, everything that is found in nature. So there is a biodiversity hotspot in Karnataka. I'm sure you're aware of it. Can anybody mention it?
Western Ghats.
Western Ghats. So why is it called biodiversity hotspot? It has many endangered species and many endemic species. Endemic species means that species that are found only there. They are not found elsewhere. And why aren't they found elsewhere? Because the environment for that species to survive is found only there. For instance, in a particular area in the Western Ghats, there are what are called as myristica swamps. They are not found anywhere else. So these are precious habitats. Why should we save these biodiversity hotspots? What is the benefit?
If these habitats are lost, then likely we will lose all the species that survive there, and that will lead to extinction.
Correct. These are not only that, the biodiversity hotspots have so many valuable things to offer to us. For instance, the genetic material. all genes of food crops are locked up in these areas. So if, for instance, we were to lose the seeds and crops that we grow, you dip into these areas because there are gene banks. They are stored for us. Nature stores it for us. There are chemicals, fibers. For instance, they are studying the flight pattern of a particular dragonfly to improve vertical takeoff and landing planes. They are trying to use lizard venom of a particular species for hypertension, to develop a drug. So India is going to be a superpower because of its biodiversity assets, but we are losing it because we have not recognized what is the biggest threat, and the law doesn't recognize what is the biggest threat. And what is it? Can anybody guess? It's a tough one.
Humans.
Humans, of course, we are the biggest threat to anybody, to everything on this planet. But there is a particular act of humans. Yes. Consumerism. Okay. Any other? Cutting of trees. Okay. But there is one effect of all this, that is, we humans are causing to biodiversity. Pollution.
Acceptance.
Sorry?
Acceptance. There is no acceptance we have.
Acceptance. Okay. Okay. Population pressure. Okay. Good. So, you're all partly correct, but we in conservation call it fragmentation. Fragmentation of habitat comes under this broad field of landscape ecology. I don't want to, because you're not biology students, I don't want to go into that. But to put it simply, whenever large blocks of forests are intruded into by humans, what it does is it forms new edges, forest edges, and from these edges there is slow degradation of habitat that sets in. So science is recognizing that fragmentation of natural habitats, whether it's due to agriculture, due to development, and as you all said, due to some form of human activity, whether it's consumerism, whether it is cutting of trees, whether it is construction of a road, etc., which we'll see. So, and also, mind you, this is, please don't treat it saying only the rich people are destroying forests and there's no impact of poor people. Humans are humans and there is impact at multiple levels. We are not trying to, while it is certain that we need to ensure social justice to marginalized communities, at the same time to argue that there is no impact whatsoever is incorrect. We'll come to that. So therefore, fragmentation needs to be addressed, and addressed urgently, even from the perspective or from the issue of climate change. You're all reading about climate change every other day. Global warming, climate change. So what is happening in climate change is gradually species are shifting, the vegetation is shifting. So certain species of plants which were found at, say, a certain altitude there's local extinction and it's going up in the altitudinal range. So what happens? Those animals which are adapted to those plants will have to move up. So you need connectivity of habitat, and fragmentation affects connectivity of habitat. Landscape connectivity is lost. Some of you, anybody from Hubli or the coast, Karwar, Ankola. Anybody from that side? So there's a new railway that is proposed. So that is cutting through pristine habitats in the Western Ghats. So these are some of the threats that cause fragmentation of and affect biodiversity. So what has science done about this? So there are scholarly reviews and scientific work done on the impact of fragmentation, and one of the seminal work has been done by Simon Levin of Princeton, and his book is Fragile Dominion. If you have an opportunity, you should read it, and some excerpts can be read on the net. So Simon Levin's argument is that fragmentation affects biodiversity at multiple levels, at the level of an individual species, at the level of a community of species, and at the landscape level. So therefore, we need to address fragmentation. He also goes on to say at the so-called alpha, beta, and gamma levels. So you need to look at this very carefully. Recently, the IUCN also brought out this. IUCN is International Union for Conservation of Nature. So they have also said that 3/4 of the world's threatened species are imperiled by agriculture. So, but here there are political aspects to this also, apart from just legal and scientific. So land conversion is going on a massive scale. Whole lot of things are happening. Overharvesting is overharvesting biodiversity. Because we all have this notion that, something is being harvested, some communities are harvesting it. Why should we come in the way of it? It is not cutting of trees. But I don't think it's a detailed topic for a separate talk. But in a nutshell, if I were to tell you, for instance, in an area like Nagarhole National Park, which is about 640 square kilometers, the equation is as follows in terms of harvesting. 600 square kilometers, 6,000 people, 60 plus tigers, 600 plus elephants, and the nearest market for this harvested produce is 6 kilometers away. It is never ever sustainable. It is not going to be sustainable. Whereas in Brazil, in the Amazon, you have communities that are completely delinked from modern society. They don't wear clothes. The nearest market is some 500 miles away. And what do? They collect it for their own consumption. And more importantly, somebody said population. The density of population in the interiors of Amazon is 1 person per 100 square miles. In a place like Nagarhole, it is 10 persons per square kilometer. So when you crash land ideas or systems that are working in Amazon into India, you will have a problem. Likewise, the African tourism model cannot come into India, for the simple reason that Africa has landscape. Just the Serengeti, Masai Mara, Ngorongoro landscape is 36,000 square kilometers. So, in other words, your Nagarhole boundary will start next to CMR. But that's not the case. Till you reach the boundary, which is 240 kilometers away, you will see nothing. So therefore, you need to look at this from this perspective. And as a human race, we are overtaking everything and destroying everything in our path. And the scientific community is warning us. Now, let's come straight to the legal aspect, which may be, have you studied the Biodiversity Act? No. Okay, you can look at it. But The Biodiversity Act does not contain the word fragmentation. Why? If the act is there, it goes into sustainable harvest, it goes into patenting, it goes into constitution of state biodiversity boards and national biodiversity boards. It goes into why foreign entities have to get special permissions before they harvest, and also there are several other issues that this act covers. But fundamentally, it does not cover the most important threat to biodiversity, which is fragmentation. And this is one of the fault lines that I want to highlight today. Because in my view, and I believe it's a logical thought, that in order to save biodiversity, this act is prescribing a whole lot of things. But this act should at least recognize, because tomorrow you appear before a court and you're arguing to save Western Ghats, and it would be great, you can still convince the judge on the scientific aspects, but it would be great if the law had taken into account and specifically had a provision that fragmentation must be avoided. And projects that affect or cause fragmentation must not be approved except so and so, so and so. You can't have a blanket ban on anything in this country, mostly. But then you need to regulate it considerably. So this is one of the issues. So if you are trying to save biodiversity, it is very important that we recognize the scientific findings that fragmentation is the threat, and we need to find solutions in order to minimize that threat or eliminate it in certain cases wherever possible. So let's move on. I don't know if you have studied the Forest Rights Act. It is called as the Scheduled Tribes Recognition and Other Traditional Forest Dwellers Recognition of Forest Rights Act. It was enacted in 2006. The rules were framed in 2008, and from January 2008 it has come into effect. So the statement of objects of this law simply says that people are integral to the very survival and sustainability of ecosystems. Completely untrue. As somebody very nicely and simply put it, nature does not need us. We need nature. Nature will survive without us. These animals and plants have evolved millions of years ago, before the first human set foot on earth. So therefore, this presumption in the object of the law itself is incorrect. And none of the presumptions made in this law, which probably would have been relevant 10,000 years ago, before the advent of agriculture, doesn't hold good today. I published a paper in the magazine called Seminar. It calls Defragmenting Nature. If you just type Defragmenting Nature, you'll be able to download it. There are a lot of arguments that it was a co-authored piece with Dr. Ullas Karanth and myself. And we have covered the subject in great detail as to why today we can, and including the earlier point I made on fragmentation. So those who are interested can look at it. So therefore, see, when humans and large animals like tigers, and yesterday, day before, you would have read 2 people were killed by tigers in Nagarhole, near Nagarhole, and so forth. There will be serious conflict. Nothing is harmonious. And therefore, both lose out. The poor people lose out, and animals lose out. It's an extremely, what shall I say,
dangerous battle that goes on insidiously outside outside your field of experience. So you need to recognize this and bring out laws that are not going to perpetuate this thing, but unfortunately we have this law called as the Forest Rights Act. Now, this act also has given wide-ranging rights to a variety of issues. We talked of over-harvesting earlier. So, fire is another threat to biodiversity, because fire is indiscriminate. It burns everything. And are there any natural fires? What causes fires? Anybody? Have you ever forest fires? You keep reading about it in the media. There are no natural fires in the majority of our country, part of our country, where there are deciduous forests. Deciduous forests are those which shed leaves. Sometimes in the temperate forests in the Himalayas, there could be some natural fires. But here, all forest fires are man-made. It's caused by a variety of reasons, or it's simple cases of arson. So, and fire is used to collect many things. Fire is used to collect honey. Fire is used to clear the vegetation, to collect fallen deer antlers, and so many other things. And then there is a farmer there, elephants have grazed his crop. Again, the issue of fragmentation, there's a small holding. So it's in conflict. Cattle killed by a tiger, then the tiger will be poisoned. This is a battle that goes on every day, and therefore spatially separating humans and nature to the extent possible should be the goal. But this law has created pretty much the opposite. Now let us look at in detail, or rather just a particular issue that I want to flag. The bill was introduced in the Lok Sabha on 13 December 2005. In the bill, if you read the last portion, the last paragraph here, it says, provided forest rights determined under this act for vesting in the core areas of national parks and sanctuaries shall be granted on a provisional basis for a period of 5 years. And by that time, they should be offered a proper resettlement outside these national parks and sanctuaries. This was the bill. The bill was referred to a joint parliamentary committee. I hope you have all studied the process of how a bill is introduced and it finally becomes law. I'm not going into that because that's not the subject today. So, subsequently what happened? After the joint parliamentary committee report was considered, you please see the subsection 2 of section 4. Forest rights recognized under this act in critical wildlife habitats may be subsequently modified or resettled provided no forest right holders shall be resettled, blah blah blah. So this was changed. So today what has happened is, under this law, 52 lakh hectares of forest land have been granted to people under individual and community rights. 52 lakh hectares. Can anybody translate it or mention it in square kilometers? 52,000 square kilometers. 52,000 square kilometers is almost the size of a state of Assam. All these laws being in place, this law has, and the Forest Survey of India has estimated that about 71% claims have beyond the cutoff date, because this said that the cutoff date will be 13 December 2005, as you saw on the bill. But it's going on, and just 2 days ago, Telangana government has announced that 11.5 lakh acres will be given away beyond the cutoff date, or rather much after the cutoff date. So in net effect, this law which was created to recognize pre-existing rights which were not recognized under the Forest Act, it has been turned into a Land Grant Act. So, to the detriment of nature and biodiversity. And I'm not saying that the livelihood interests of these people must not be protected. It certainly must be protected. But again, if you apply good scientific principles, not in the manner and form that this law has envisaged. And you would be surprised or shocked to know a piece of data that I will share. There are 10 crore tribal people in this country. Do you know what is the budgetary allocation to take care of the livelihood and interests of these 10 crore people? 1,30,000 crores per annum. Nobody has questioned it. It's not right to question it also. But what is happening to it? Why are these people not getting those benefits? These are questions, searching questions that you all must ask. So this is one. I am still on the subject of fragmentation. I will be practically throughout this talk. Fragmentation is not just caused by human settlements. Fragmentation is caused by a variety of reasons, whether it's mining in Kudremukh, which we fought, dams, roads, pipelines, etc. Now, we have a law called as the Forest Conservation Act. Roads in particular, for those who are familiar, this is a stretch of the Western Ghats. We all need roads, we all use roads. But look at the kind of intrusions that have happened over a period of time. Within 5, 10, 15, 20 kilometers, you have multiple intrusions of roads. Now, if you see the bottom, there is a road proposed called as Sishila to Bairapura. That's small. That's just about 5 kilometers at some places. 15 kilometers, 16 kilometers. So if you keep on puncturing this biodiversity hotspots continuously at 5, 10, 15, 20 kilometers, this is where the impact of fragmentation will be felt, and over a period of time, the integrity of the Western Ghats will go, a lot of species will get extinct, and therefore we need to address this issue. But let us look at the law. The Forest Conservation Act was enacted in 1980. But there is not a word on this in the Forest Conservation Act. And the Forest Conservation Act, if anybody has seen, is just a 5-section act. It's a very small act. But all the detail is in the guidelines and the rules. So if you look at both, they have a system of looking at projects only from the size of the project. Up to 5 hectares, 5 to 50 hectares and above. 5 to 40 hectares, 40 to 100 hectares and above. Now, on the contrary, if you apply scientific principles, a 1 hectare small project in a large 500 or 100 square kilometer area is more detrimental than a 100 hectare project in a in a fragmented 200 hectare forest block which is not connected to a large landscape or is not there are no endangered species in that. So you need to look at this very differently. The law fails to recognize that this applying scientific principles of ensuring that forests are not fragmented. Now let us look at a very interesting thing. Somebody said cutting of trees, planting of trees. There is an all-pervasive myth that compensatory afforestation will mitigate forest loss. Am I correct? Many of you would have read And we are bombarded daily with saying, oh, somebody has planted 5,000 trees, somebody has planted lakhs of trees. This is a real forest. This is what we are achieving with afforestation. Some exotic plants, species that are planted. This is a species called acacia, and that's a natural evergreen forest. So this, everybody loves this, as the very famous writer Sainath, who writes on agriculture, wrote once that everybody loves a good drought. It's a seminal paper. Everybody loves compensatory afforestation. Why? Because corporates love it. Because they say, okay, I'll take 50 hectares wherever I want, I'll plant some trees somewhere else. Decision makers or politicians love it, saying, we are growing trees, why are you raising the flag? And they'll go and tell the court. Kudremukh mining company went and told the court, we have planted some X number of trees. And we have increased forest cover in the mining lease area. Of course, that thing was junk because we produced other data. So this everybody loves because it's the easy way out. But the truth is very different. Let's take some details of the national document that is produced on forest cover by the Forest Survey of India. So there are various, I don't want to bore you with all the things. The point simply remains that the green one is shown as forest cover, and the the blue area is all tree stands with canopy density of 10% and having an extent of more than 1 hectare. Simply put, I told you how important it is to save large landscapes. So this confuses the issue by taking tree cover outside areas. Forest cover they call it, but if you read the subtext, it is tree stands. It could be anything. It could even be sometimes coconut plantations. So therefore we need to be careful when we look at these kind of data. In net effect, what is therefore happening is that we may be greening India, but we are losing forests. The one that side is a monoculture teak plantation. This is a natural forest. So we need to keep this carefully, understand this carefully when we react to policy changes. So what is the solution? When this was critiqued, this tree planting and compensatory afforestation was critiqued by experts, the government reacted. It said, okay, yes, your argument is fair, so we will have naturally assisted recovery. But we don't, that thing has jumped. We don't need naturally, we need natural recovery. This particular forest I've seen, it was cut down in the 60s, late 60s for raising teak plantation. Teak plantations failed. Today it has come back as natural forest only with protection. Nobody planted a single sapling anywhere. So therefore we need to understand the scientific aspects when we intervene. In fact, this compensatory afforestation has taken a very major, it occupies policy. Before the Compensatory Act, Forestation Act came in, there was a big argument. There was a fund called CAMPA, because Supreme Court of India was hearing a case in the major Godavarman writ petition. Is anybody aware of the Godavarman writ petition? On forest, omnibus forest case, you should look at it. So, the court was considering what should be the valuation of forests. The eminent jurist, Mr. Falinariman, stood up, suo motu, and he said, this court must not put a value to forests because there will always be somebody who will be able to put that money. and take over these forests. But of course, the court went ahead, heard him, but went ahead, and we have this law. Compensatory afforestation, which is the main money spinner, is collected under this law. I had published a piece along with Shekhar Dattatri on why this bill in the present form will squander away crores of rupees and not compensate. The Parliamentary Standing Committee invited people to, before the act came into force, when the bill was under consideration. So I had an opportunity to appear before the Parliamentary Committee. And one of the members of the Parliamentary Committee had brought a copy of it. See, one thing I want to tell you. We may feel that, oh, what is happening in Parliament? Oh, how are these? All these are just debate, din, nothing is happening. Don't be under that impression. The Parliamentary Standing Committees which bills are referred go into great detail, involve real people, and as lawyers, as concerned citizens, you are empowered to participate in that process. So you should participate and share your opinion and views to these committees. It's important. Otherwise you will be lamenting and saying, oh, everything, what can I do? Please don't take that view. Be a little more proactive. These processes are robust, and I can tell you this, and in this example I will tell you what happened. So the member of parliament, one member of parliament of that committee had brought a cutting of this article, and when my opportunity came, he said, I have read your piece, so you have challenged the very premise of this law. I said, yes. Now you will have to justify before the committee. I said, if you give me time, I will justify. He said, I'll give you 15 minutes. So I presented my view, and fundamentally there were two aspects, again linked to fragmentation. I said, this fund, which was already about 50,000 crores, lying with the central government. I said, one, there are great opportunities to apply this fund to buy up land within these biodiversity hotspots, which will consolidate and reduce fragmentation. Second, for people marooned inside these parks, this money must be used for voluntary resettlement, because many people want to come out of forests. Thankfully, the second suggestion was taken up and it is in the rules now. But the first suggestion was not specifically taken up. So there is an opportunity for all of you to participate in these processes. So this is another illustration of why science should get infused into law. The last point which I want to deal with is the myth of community management. There is a growing voice saying that hand over all forests to Gram Sabhas. They will take care of it. So this area is, what is the area, this particular area? Oh, what is it? OMBR layout. Okay. So there is a police station in this area. They are all good people here. Why do you need a police station? We are not involving ourselves in any crime. We are students, we are law students, there are other students here. See, every place there is a criminal element in society which has to be stopped by law and by law enforcement. So much so, even in our forests. It's a good thing if the community gets involved. It can be a second line of defense, but it cannot be the primary line of defense, for the simple reason that the illegal trade in biodiversity and wildlife is considered to be second only to narcotics, gun running, narcotics, human trafficking. It is estimated by Interpol to be about $20 billion. So these people are not going to smile at a Gram Sabha resolution and salute and go away. The criminal element will be at play. and they are the first cogs in the growing illegal trade in wildlife. So therefore, we need a professional government agency to do law enforcement in accordance with law. And they should be accountable, certainly. Excesses will always have to be dealt with, but we need law enforcement. We can all say we are taxpayers, so let us have a duplicate key to the RBI vaults, because it's our own money. By the same logic, is it ever possible? It's our duty to pay taxes, but it's not our right to demand a key. So we need to have a professional mechanism to deal with protection. And of course that protection mechanism must be accountable, officers must be accountable, excesses must be dealt with strictly, but then to say that hand it over to people is incorrect. People should certainly be allowed to participate, and they can be an excellent second line of defense, but not the primary line of defense. We have this thing, and you must all be aware, read somewhere, water is flowing into the ocean, it's going waste. You would have heard this. So much of water is going into the sea. Why don't we have a river diversion? This is the talk. Unfortunately, again, that is because of scientific ignorance. Water must go into the sea. In fact, there was a case in the former Soviet Union. There was the Aral Sea, which dried up because all water stopped entering the sea. So it's a complex process. Rivers are a living, in fact, Uttarakhand High Court said rivers are living organisms or something to that effect. So right from the upstream headwaters to the estuary where there are mangroves and so forth, the river is a complex ecological system, and people are using it for irrigation, for daily use, for drinking water, etc. But do you know, as law students you must be aware, rivers are probably more valuable to the country than our quote-unquote strategic assets. But rivers have no protection under the law, other than a few sections in the IPC which talks of an offense if you defile a water source, and some provisions in the local land revenue rules and laws. There is no law which protects our rivers in totality. In fact, when the rally for rivers happened, there's a very, what shall I say, extremely scholarly scientist called as Dr. Jagdish Krishnaswamy. So he is one of India's best conservation hydrologists. He's a good friend of mine. We worked together on the Kudremukh issue also. So I called him and I said, look, planting trees and rivers, what is the link? It is unscientific. This will not work. He said, I know what to do. How can we take it up? I said, look, I will, because I come from a different background, he comes from a scientific background. So I called up Isha Foundation and I said, look, we have ideas on, this is not the correct approach. They gave us an opportunity. We met Sadhguru Jaggi Vasudev in Ahmedabad. He gave us 20 minutes, it went on for more than an hour. And we said, this is what is the thing, the least that can happen is you must share with the Prime Minister that rivers do not have any legal protection. He said, can you give me a legal note? It's there, I published that in the form of an article also. which I can share if you want. You can search for it. And this aspect needs to be dealt with a little carefully, because people use rivers. You can't just say prohibit everything. So, and enacting a new law is also difficult. So, under the Environment Protection Act, you can declare the headwaters to the estuary as an eco-sensitive zone. That's possible within the existing laws, and will also not curtail the use of water, bona fide use of water by people who are living around and others. We are also using the river waters in Bangalore, for instance, the Kaveri. So therefore, these are some of the things. So water going into the ocean is not a waste. So you need to be very careful, because if you see there, this is Jagdish's graphic which he has created. So he has said that construction of dams and reservoirs result in flow being restricted, and irrigation hydroelectricity requirement should not compromise ecological needs. There is what is called as a minimum ecological flow. So therefore, these are some of the scientific aspects that you need to factor in. Almost an hour now. So the last point is on the, I won't say conflict, but confusion in terms of protecting wildlife and protecting domesticated animals. For instance, there was a big furor when a particular tiger in Maharashtra called Avni, and there's a lot of stuff on the net, had to be killed. The people used to kill and so forth. I don't want to go into the details, but the point remains that sometimes, for the sake of saving tigers as a species, you may have to eliminate, capture or kill some of these species in order to resolve conflict. Otherwise, you will lose public support for these things. So this is a view which is a little different from animal rights. For instance, when the same issue erupted in Rajasthan near Ranthambore, there was a hue and cry because the Supreme Court said that it cannot be released because it can be dangerous to human life. We have another issue of dogs. Feral dogs are dogs that are basically domesticated dogs but have gone wild. They have surrounded a sambar deer there, and they are going to make a kill, which means that that's one animal less for tigers in that area. So these are all issues that the law must carefully address by looking at science. And finally, this was another seminal paper of Dr. John Robinson on all the points you raised earlier of population, of tree cutting, etc., which said, how do we, the planet tomorrow, how do we ensure that? Okay, no problem, we are just finishing. So he came up with an idea. I think that was a warning to me. So he came up with an idea of sustainable landscapes, whereby, as I was saying from the beginning, you lock up these biodiversity rich areas for the future, where there are these designs, chemicals, fibers, genes, etc. But certain areas must be intensively used to take care of the needs of 8 billion people of the planet. So these are all ideas based on good science. There's a lot of knowledge with us, and as legal professionals, emerging legal professionals, you must keep this in mind, that we need to go and understand. I'm not saying you go and become a scientist. All I'm saying is that you need to be acutely aware of what is happening and ensure that there is a science infusion in law and policy. Thank you very much, and I'll be happy to I want you to ask questions, not just on this subject. As I said, anything, any other question you have, there's nothing right or wrong, so you don't have to feel shy or say that, oh, the speaker will say that this is a silly question. No. Everything is a silly question, everything is a serious question. So don't bother, just ask what you want pertaining to conservation laws. Thank you. Yes.
So based on the feral dogs
I'll
photograph.
close this
Yeah.
and I'll take my. So where's the cap for this? Okay, before I forget.
So
Feral dogs,
yeah,
yes.
That same concept. So let's take we are in a forest, a hypothetical situation.
Yeah.
So we see a pack of wolves attacking a deer.
Right.
Or even a single wolf attacking a deer.
Right.
Right. We as humans, we are compelled. Should we stop it or let it kill?
What's your answer?
My compassion would be to stop it.
Stop it.
Yeah.
Now, this is where we differ. Yes, I understand that you have a love for animals. Very good. But this is a case where the wolves are part of that landscape. The deer is also part of the landscape. By the same token, how does the deer survive there? It has to eat something. What does it eat?
Grass.
Grass. Somebody will say, all these deers are eating grass. Grass is also a living thing. This is not correct. Remove the deer. So the thing is, wherever natural processes are playing out, the grass grows, or the trees grow, plants grow, there are leaves, there are fruits, nuts, etc. There are deer, and there are wolves. So the wolf will not unnecessarily kill like we humans kill. We humans kill without rhyme or reason. I don't like your face, I'll kill you. They don't do that, no rowdyism or nothing of that kind. They will kill only for their needs. So it is a natural process that has to play out. So you should not interfere in that process. So wherever there is if for instance, in the same place you are watching a deer and somebody enters illegally with a gun and shoots the deer, you should stop that person if you can and hand him over to the authorities. But you should stop the wolf from hunting the deer.
So then, are we not discriminating with the feral dogs? Even they are going to eat the deer.
Correct. But they are not part of the ecosystem. Whereas wolves are. And we humans feed these dogs also. No problem. Let them in the village, they can keep the dogs, they can feed the dogs, no problem. But when it comes inside and hunts wild prey, then there is a problem. Yes, please.
So in United States, there is this concept called conservation easement.
Yes.
And wherein it's a huge property maintained by governmental agencies, and they give tax rebate or tax benefit to the individuals. So in India, why is that we do not have such a concept like conservation easement, wherein the individuals or a community and government can work together, where we are not giving a complete right to the government where they interfere with the nature or they take their own call of making certain projects. So why can't we have such a concept like conservation easement in India?
Very, very good question, very valid point also. I am aware of this subject. In fact, let me point out that the law provides for it. There are two categories of reserves which can be notified under the Wildlife Act. One is called as a conservation reserve and the other is called as a community reserve. These are constituted under section 36 A, B, C, D of the Wildlife Act. The idea that you just now explained is taken care under those sections. what happens is conservation reserves will typically involve government land which the community is using. For instance, some grazing land or any other land, which is for the common good of the community. If the community volunteers and tells the government that, look, let's come to an agreement and we want to protect something here, and we will form our own committees, and please notify this as a conservation reserve. The land will still vest with the government, but the idea that you explained, it becomes something called as a conservation easement. The second is private land. If any of you own, say, 500 acres or whatever it is, you can approach the government and say, I want to notify this land as a community reserve. Community reserve doesn't mean the entire community. It can be an individual also. And the government, and you can draw up a plan yourself. The forest department will also give their inputs. So you agree upon a plan of what and how you're going to conserve that area. And that can be notified as a community reserve. This is very much possible. And third, as I showed you in the first slide, some people want to come out of the forest. Under the CSR funds, any corporate can go in and say, look, I will ensure that I'll buy alternative land for these people, and I've already had a dialogue with these people. They are volunteering to come out, and I will create all the facilities for them outside. In some cases, they'll say, we just want to sell and go away. We don't want anything. We know where to live and manage. Both scenarios are there. In fact, in that article, Sowing the Seeds of Disaster, I've highlighted that. So, there's just like any market transaction of land, the corporate or any donor can pay money and surrender the land to the department, forest department, to be merged with the surrounding forests and protection. This is also possible. This applies even to identified corridors where animals have to move. It's a narrow corridor, attempts have been made. In fact, in Kudremukh, let me tell you that one of our patrons of our organization, he's a top computer engineer and software engineer in Microsoft from Bangalore, settled there. So he one day came and said, look, he told one of our mentors that I have $100,000 of my personal money. I want to give it to you for wildlife. He said, no, I don't have a project, you keep the money with you. Then after this mining thing in Kudremukh, there was a community which had 500 cattle, buffaloes and so forth. They were supplying milk to the mining township. There were 8 families. And they did not really have any legal rights over the land. But we coordinated with the forest department and we offered them money, identified land outside and bought it for them. And they happily went out. And today you're seeing wild cattle there, Dar. So all these possibilities exist, and that's the reason why under the Compensatory Afforestation Fund Act, one of my suggestions to the government was, see, foreign aid agencies like World Bank and JICA and all these people, they will give you money for tree planting. And we discussed the, that tree planting does not really mitigate. But they don't give money for land. This Compensatory Afforestation Fund is India's sovereign fund. It can be applied any way that India wants. And in my view, a huge opportunity is being lost, including the idea that you mentioned of conservation easements, on applying these funds to ensure that certain lands which can be used for conservation by encouraging and involving the community, and also applying funds where they want to come out and you consolidate the habitats. There are many ways it can be done. There's a third way which happens is that if the community comes forward, which are on the edge of these national park sanctuaries, high density wildlife, say Bandipur, Nagarhole. So if they come forward, of course you need to look at it from an ecological perspective. You can shift the tourism into the conservation easements that you're talking about, and thereby reduce pressure on the park. And these people, instead of treating that elephant or the tiger as a dangerous animal, they'll be welcoming it. So you convert a problem into an opportunity and a livelihood option. After all, on 5 acres of land, if they grow maize or ragi, how much will they earn? Here, people are willing, some of the tourism resorts, the big ones are charging 40,000 rupees a day per person. So, these are all options that are available, and you're absolutely right in saying that we must look at these kind of opportunities in order to A, consolidate habitats, and B, enlarge. It's also called as rewilding. It's at its initial stages now, but very good point. Yes.
Sir, I have two questions. The first one is regarding endemic species also being affected by fragmentation, as you suggested. You can do afforestation, but you cannot shift these species elsewhere.
Correct.
So when we lose these species, we have lost them forever. What is the position of our legal system on such endemic species, and how do they allow projects to affect endemic species, knowing that if you're losing them, you're losing them forever? The second question is on, for example, I read this case of the ISA Foundation's headquarters in Tamil Nadu, and there were some suggestions that it encroached on an elephant corridor or something like that. So my question is, what happens in such situations when there is ingress and some damage has been done to a forest ecosystem? How can conservationists expect the legal system to sort of protect such instances or such situations? And what can we expect as a resolution to something that has already been done? For example, a building has been built and the damage has been done.
Okay, good. So the first question is on endemic species and what protection it has under the law. See, India under the Wildlife Act classifies species under schedules. So there is the Schedule 1, now it's been reconstructed. Earlier it was Schedule 1, 2, 3 and 4. Now everything has come into Schedule 1 and Schedule 2. So many of the endemic species that you're referring to come under Schedule 1. Schedule 1 has the highest protection under the law. And if any hunting takes place of Schedule 1 species, the minimum imprisonment is 3 years, which can extend to 7 years. So that is as far as hunting is concerned. And many of the areas where such endemic species are found are typically notified as national parks and sanctuaries. So the habitats also receive protection. And therefore, when a development project seeks land within a national park or sanctuary, ordinarily it must not be given. The law says there are two sections in the Wildlife Act. Section 29, which applies to sanctuaries, and 35(6), which applies to national parks. It says no destruction unless such destruction is for the improvement and better management of wildlife therein. So there are checks and balances to ensure that these habitats of endemic species are protected, and you're right, because it can't be, it cannot survive or translocated to some other areas. Just like the cheetah translocation is fraught with many issues. You cannot take an endemic species like, say, the lion-tailed macaque, which is found in the Western Ghats, and put it in Bandipur or some other place. It will not survive. The second aspect is about what happens when damage is already done, and how do you recover, whether you can correct the damage or not. Certainly, in some cases, you can. For instance, we took up an issue pertaining to a road which was cutting through Nagarhole at a very sensitive zone. And ultimately, the Supreme Court held that the traffic on that road between 6 p.m. and 6 a.m. is stopped. Mining was stopped in Kudremukh. So there are many interventions that can happen where you can correct a situation. Which, for instance, coming back to Kudremukh, it was a development mistake of the past. The lease was given first in 1969. But in 1999, our knowledge of the value of that area had gone up considerably. And therefore the argument before the court held that this is far more valuable to society than taking out low-grade iron ore. So in some cases you can intervene and approach. In fact, the state government itself, in its final affidavit to the Supreme Court, said that the mining should be wound up in 5 years. So the government also took a reasonable decision, in my view, that the mining should not go on endlessly, because there are 3 rivers that originate in that area. It's a biodiversity hotspot, etc. So in some cases you can approach courts and correct the wrongs, so to say, done. It is open for citizens, and as you all know, I asked Professor Subramania, and he told me that you have studied constitutional law already. So what are the provisions under the Constitution that you can approach courts? 32 is correct. What is the other? 226. So 226 you can approach high courts. 32 you can approach the Supreme Court. What is the difference between 226 and 32? Very correct. He is saying that 226 has a wider approach, meaning that you can not just challenge infringement of fundamental rights, but also challenge infringement of statutory rights. So, high courts have wide-ranging powers to intervene in some of these aspects. So, as a citizen, if you feel that something wrong has been done or there is something incorrect, the damage has to be corrected, you can use these constitutional provisions and approach courts in order to seek that remedial measures are put in place. For instance, in Kudremukh again it happened that we approached the court in 99 when the lease ended, that there should be no renewal of lease. And there are several judgments of the Supreme Court which have held that a lease in a forest land is not an automatic renewal, but it should be treated as a fresh lease. So therefore, these are available. You can also approach the government, you can approach statutory authorities, depending on the issue that you have taken up or decide to take up. So there are remedies available. So you're all tired? Huh? Okay, so I'm told by my young friend that we have finished our time. Thank you very much for participating. Thank you for listening to me. And I hope at least I've driven home this one point, that the importance of science getting into law. Thank you.
Thank you, sir, for your words of wisdom and to give us the real world scenario about the conservation laws and the faults in our approach. And special thanks to you for addressing all our queries.